Gospel of Matthew, the 22nd chapter. Read something to you about that, what he did say. That same day, Sadducees who deny that there is a resurrection came to Jesus, and they asked Jesus, "Teacher, Moses said if a man who doesn't have children dies, his brother must marry his wife and produce children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married, then died. Because he had no children, he left his widow to his brother. The same thing happened with the second brother and the third, and in fact, with all 7 brothers. Finally, the woman died. At the resurrection, which of the 7 brothers will be her husband? They were all married to her." And Jesus responded, "You are wrong because you don't know either the Scriptures and God's power. At the resurrection, people won't marry, nor will they be given in marriage. Instead, they will be like angels from God." May God bless his reading of his holy word for us this day. Well, last Sunday I spoke about the 3 main reasons that people get divorced in our country, and they are physical or emotional abuse, addictive behavior patterns, and infidelity. But there are a lot of other reasons why people get divorced besides just those 3. Money ranks as one of the top issues that separate people one from another. Illness, surprisingly, a lot of people divorce their spouse when they get chronically ill, sometimes with a terminal illness. Sometimes that can be a mental illness as well as a physical illness, but they just don't want to be in that relationship any longer. Maybe the responsibilities are overwhelming to them or whatever. But most of the reasons why people get divorced would be probably considered as mistakes that were made, or maybe even sins that were committed. Now, divorce represents a marriage failure. The first marriage just did not work. It failed for whatever reason. But fortunately, our faith is a grace-based faith. In other words, we believe that every sin can be forgiven. Every mistake can be forgiven, no matter how grievous they may have been. That we live under God's grace, that God is a God of the second chance and the third chance. Every sin can be forgiven. Every divorce that I've ever been associated with, in trying to help a couple, or just things that have come to know about them, every divorce has experienced great pain. I don't know of any divorce where people were smiling and laughing as they separated from each other, or they separated as good friends. That rarely happens. Obviously, it'd be most intense for the couple who are involved, the husband and wife, but also for their children. Children will no longer live with their biological mother and father in the house at the same time. Parents, in-laws, when we get married, that person that comes into our family becomes a part of our family. The parents may actually, or the grandparents, whatever the case may be, may actually really like the spouse that their son or daughter is divorcing. There's pain involved in that. Sometimes friends. We make friends with couples, other couples like ourselves, if we're still married. And when a couple friend divorces, sometimes we're really kind of torn in the middle. Well, who do we support? Do we support both of them? And knowing the circumstances may kind of change, we got to wonder about that. All those things cause a lot of pain, not just for the people who are involved, but for everybody sort of who knows that couple, and even the church is involved with the pain of divorce. It affects every congregation. But death also can devastate someone just as much as divorce can. And when someone has been married for a long time, even for a short time in a really good marriage, the loss of a spouse through death can just be a kind of a crushing, devastating kind of experience. I think even the better, the stronger, the happier the marriage is, almost makes the pain of losing a spouse even that much worse. But in the midst of our pain, whether we suffer that pain from the divorce of a relationship and how painful that has been, or the death of a loved one, God understands what it is that we are feeling. Sometimes we cannot even begin to express the feeling, the hurt, the devastation that we may feel inside. In Romans chapter 8, verse 26, is one of my favorite passages, I guess, where the Apostle Paul says this: "In the same way, the Spirit, that is God's Spirit, comes to help our weakness. We don't know what we should pray, but the Spirit himself pleads our case with unexpressed groans. I like that because sometimes we don't know what to pray. We don't know what to put into words to express what it is that we are feeling. Sometimes we may either literally or just figuratively be groaning in our spirit, and then God interprets our groans. He puts it into words that God knows what we are feeling and experiencing. Sometimes, whether we have lost a spouse through divorce or death, the thoughts of remarriage may seem almost impossible. For those who've been in a good marriage, no one can ever take the place of a beloved spouse. They may try, but probably will not succeed in that. And they may succeed, but it's difficult. I know that there are faithful Christians who have had a wonderful marriage and who contemplate when a spouse dies, would they want to marry again? And probably every couple has had that conversation. It's a conversation that married couples bring up every once in a while, and they do so kind of guardedly, and they may not always want to know the answer, because the spouse who may be thinking, you have loved me so much that I'm sure that when I'm gone, you would never want to marry because you never find anybody that would equal me. And people think that way. So it's almost like if you said, yeah, I think I would get married probably quickly after you die, that just doesn't come across very well. And so, but it's kind of a subject that we do talk about from time to time, and wonder what would we do if one of us dies before the other. Some people say, no, I won't marry another person because that would be kind of unfaithful. You know, we were married, for life and eternity, and I just I can't imagine that I would want to marry somebody because when I meet my spouse someday in God's kingdom, I'm sure they would be disappointed that I married somebody else, that I wasn't the only love of their life. You ever had those kind of thoughts before? I think all of us probably have. When we lose a spouse through death, I think sometimes we almost lose our will to live. It's like we can be so crushed that we almost feel like life is not worth living anymore. I talked a little bit about my grandmother last week, and when my grandfather died, the spark that had always kind of defined her life was gone. And she'd had a wonderful sense of humor. She loved to laugh. She just had a great personality. But that was gone. And really till the day she died, she never got it back again. I think her heart was so broken at the loss of her husband, my grandfather, that which sort of animated my grandmother was gone. I had an opportunity to talk to my father about a week before he died. And it was a very tearful goodbye, because I think both of us probably knew that we would never see each other in this life ever again. And probably the last words I said to my father was, goodbye, and I love you. But I also said, you have been a wonderful father. You've been a great grandfather to my children. But one of the great gifts that you gave me was that you taught me how to be a husband. Because I saw my dad express his love and affection to my mother throughout her lifetime. That never stopped. A hug in the kitchen or a kiss when coming home from work. They did those little things. And we learn from our parents, whether good or bad. But I learned from my father what a good husband should be like. Not just a father, but a husband. So all of you parents who have small children, keep that in mind, that how you express your love and affection for your spouse is really important, that your kids will see that. Kind of the last words that my father expressed to me was, take care of your mother. He was always concerned that if he would die first, that who would take care of her. Just tried to reassure him, well, don't worry about that, Dad, that Bill and I will make sure that Mom is well taken care of. You'll never have to worry about that. But he was thinking about her before he died. Probably the most impressive thoughts upon his mind. Well, I want to make sure that my wife is taken care of, that she doesn't suffer when I'm gone. That talks about a good marriage, doesn't it? And how important, how vital a good marriage is for everybody. Fortunately for her, her Alzheimer's disease was so far advanced that I never could tell that she really knew that Dad was gone. I looked to see if there was any kind of signs of remorse or sadness, and I couldn't see a thing. It just didn't seem to faze her at all. There's very few things that I can say that are good about Alzheimer's disease, but that would be one of them. Sometimes you just kind of get in this bliss of ignorance. You don't really know, and since you don't know, that you don't care. People remarry following a divorce or following the death of a spouse. And with each remarriage is the possibility of companionship, of much-needed love, a shared friendship, and a shared life. And that's why people get married again. The Sadducees were a religious party, and they asked Jesus a question one day. Now, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did, but the Sadducees didn't. They believed that the only way that you would live on after your death was through your children. That part of you lived in your children. So it was really important that you had children and that your family line would go on. But they asked Jesus kind of a trick question, knowing that they didn't believe in the resurrection. They were questioning him, saying, at the resurrection, people won't marry. I'm sorry, they asked him a question, and they gave this theoretical example, or Jesus does, but says, will people marry in the resurrection, such as if a man had 7 brothers, and all the brothers were married, and it was a common thing that if your brother died and left a widow and children, that you would take them into your family, and that you would care for them, make sure that they survived and they did well. So suppose then this brother takes the first wife and children in when one brother dies, but all of his 7 brothers die. He ends up having 8 wives. So when the resurrection comes, who will he be married to? And then Jesus gave an answer that probably has troubled people, and some says maybe not exactly what we would have liked to have heard. But he said, at the resurrection, people won't marry, nor will they be given in marriage. Instead, they will be like angels from God. I say some people are kind of saddened by that because they anticipate that they're going to be married now. That the person that they're married to now, they will be married to that person in heaven. But Jesus said, no, it won't be that way. Marriage is really for this life only. In the resurrection, we will have a new plane of existence. And we won't be bound by the flesh and blood that binds us now. But that will be more like the angels that God has created. It'll be a different kind of being, but we'll still have personality, we'll still have identity, but there won't be such a thing as marriage anymore. Now, what we can take good out of that, you can still see each other when you both have died and you've gone on to heaven, hopefully, and you'll be able to communicate and recognize each other and still enjoy each other, but there just won't be such thing as marriage. So, if you had a great marriage, it was really good, and then you've lost a spouse, you need not feel guilty, I think, about remarrying somebody else. But some people who've had a really wonderful marriage don't want to marry anybody else. They believe, I had the very best spouse I possibly could have had, and we loved each other, and our life was rich and full. That was enough for me. I don't want to marry somebody else, and chances are they would never measure up to my first spouse, and so I'm not going to take that chance. But other people who had a really wonderful marriage and a great marriage will choose to remarry somebody because of that very fact. Because they had such a good marriage, they believe in marriage, and they want to try it again. If they lost that spouse through death or divorce, they would try it once more. So, for those people who have been married before, and you had a good marriage, I have a little bit of advice for people who may be in that situation. Don't look for the equivalent of your first spouse, your first husband or wife. I knew a man in my former church who lost a wife. He'd been married for over 40 years. He was desperately lonely. And within about 3 months, he met a woman and he married her. He hardly knew her. But I think what he was hoping to do was to have another wife that would be just like the first wife. And she wasn't that kind of a person. She had her own unique personality and interests and talents and things. And after he got married to her, he thought, I made this huge mistake. She's not like my first wife. And they eventually got divorced. So if you do get married, don't try to find an identical replica of your first spouse. It just won't happen. But you should seek the qualities that you know are important Take that experience that you've had in the past, and if you are going to get married again, look for a person that has the qualities that you think are really important. And companionship may be the uppermost. I tell people in marriage counseling that the more compatibilities that couples have, the stronger their marriage will be. If two people are just black and white, they're just opposite in everything, they're just going to have a lot of issues, and they're going to be struggling and things. But so when you get married again, you want to try to find somebody that you have as many things in common with as you possibly can. People who share a lot of compatibilities usually have happier marriages. If you've come from a bad marriage, your first marriage just did not work out very well, learn from your mistakes. What were the things that happened in that first marriage that just didn't go very well? What kind of qualities did you see in your spouse that were sort of damaging to you? You want to avoid those kind of things again. But one of the problems with people who are getting married again after coming out of a bad marriage is they have what I call kind of a hypersensitivity. They were hurt by their first marriage, by the spouse in that first marriage. That spouse may have said things and done things to them that just really harmed their spirit. So because that's so, if they get into a second marriage, and while they're dating and courting, they may not ever have a serious kind of argument, and everything seems to be really nice and kind, but then after they're married, something happens, and they have their first quarrel, and maybe that spouse raises their voice in such a way that it harkens back, kind of a flashback to that first husband, perhaps that was abusive to them, and they said, I'm out of here. I'm never going to go through this again, and I'm going to end this marriage now before it goes any further, because I don't want to put myself in a situation like I was in the first time. Sometimes that's really an over-exaggeration, and you really shouldn't jump to that kind of a conclusion with your new spouse, because it may just be that they got angry, but they're not going to be an abusive kind of person. But I can understand why people want to guard themselves from getting hurt again. So when you get remarried coming out of a bad marriage, look at it as a fresh start. Determine, again, what values are important for you and your future mate. And don't rush it. Courting may be even more important the second time around than it was the first time around. And don't give everything away before marriage without a commitment. My dad said something to me a long time ago. It's kind of a little gem, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. And I'll share it with you, but I've never read this in per se in any kind of textbook on marriage. But he's talking about people who cohabitate before they get married. And he was really looking at, from the man's perspective, that if a woman gives the man that she's living with everything that he could possibly want before they get married, and they don't have that commitment, he may be very satisfied with never getting married. He's already getting things that he would like to have in a relationship, but he doesn't have that commitment. So if something goes bad, they can easily get out of that relationship. Take that for what it's worth. Maybe it's pretty good advice. So you have a lot of good reasons to remarry. You have a lot of life to live. And you want to share your life with someone that you love, and you need companionship. Some people don't, and that's okay if they choose never to marry again. But some people do need companionship. Remember, what God said, that it was not good that man should be alone, that he needed a helper, a companion to go through life with. That's still true, even if your first marriage came to an end one way or another, but you still need a companion. If you want a companion, then that's a great reason to get married, is to find a good companion to go through life with. Be willing to share and compromise with your new spouse for each other's mutual gain. There are some bad reasons to remarry again, and some of the bad reasons are that you are unhappy, and you want to get married and you'll think that other person will make you happy again. That may or may not happen. That you are insecure, maybe financially insecure, and things are tight and you want some security, and you're looking for security, someone to come in and help you manage your life. That's not a real great reason to get married either. Or you're in a hurry. Kind of like the gentleman that I told you who lost his wife and remarried about 3 months later. He was in too big of a hurry to get married. He made a mistake because he was in such a hurry. Or to think that you're going to marry somebody just like your former mate. Or if you think that you have a faith and you think you're going to feel really guilty for having sex before you're married, so you're going to get married so you won't feel guilty, that's not a good reason either to get married. Those are some of the reasons why you shouldn't get married. Or using someone just to provide for you. Those are not the reasons. But when you do get married, it should be, remember that triangular relationship? That God should be at the apex of that relationship. And if you have a relationship with God and your spouse has a relationship with God, you have a stronger relationship with each other. So when you marry, make sure that God is in the middle of that marriage. It's just going to work out a whole lot better. It'll be stronger if God is a part of that relationship. You know, we believe that every bad relationship can be redeemed with a good relationship by God's grace, that we can learn from our past where we have been hurt. We can take that hurt and make something better out of it. We believe in redemption. God can take our worst failures, our most painful experiences in life, and use them to create something new, something good, and something beautiful. God is the God of the second chance and the third chance. In fact, I think God gives us many chances. Remember that God intended that man should not be alone, but have a companion. Marriage is our most important human institution. And it is an important thing. If you choose to get remarried again, circumstances brought you to that place, make sure you make the right decision. Don't rush into it, but then enjoy it. And I've seen a lot of people who've had that second marriage who have really enjoyed being married to that person. Would you bow your heads with me? Gracious God, thank you for marriage. Give thanks for those marriages that maybe were not so good at the first time around, but the second time around, it became a beautiful marriage and a relationship that was so meaningful, that added so much to both people's lives. And if we have lost a first marriage through death or divorce, may we not give up, but may we, if we want to, seek that new companion for all the right reasons. And may you bless that relationship. If we are married now to the same person we've been married to for a long time, may we just give thanks that the first time around worked so well, that the person that we have married loves us and we love them. We've raised a family with that person, or are raising a family with that person. And life has just been so much richer because of that, because of our marriage. And we just give you thanks. If we haven't given you thanks for that, then we do so now. In the name of Christ, we pray. Amen.